Hello and happy Friday. We are back for another episode of Vitality. Today we're going to be talking about cumulative layout shift. Man, I swear every one of these metrics we've been doing is a tongue twister for me. So I've just been practicing and I'm going to say it one more time and then I'm going to refer to it as CLS for the rest of the day. So that's enough for me because you don't want to hear me fumble over words. But excellent to see we got lots of people already waiting. So hello to everybody that's already here on YouTube checking us out live. We appreciate that. We're going to have some time here at the end of the call for questions and answers like we've done on the rest of these episodes. And of course, I did not put my phone on silent, so I'm going to do that. But if you have specific questions, if something pops up in the middle of this stream and you have a question, put it in the chat. I'm watching all those right now, and I will save those for the end of the call when we jump into them. If you have specific examples, throw those in there too. We're all good for whatever questions you have. We will do our best to answer. I say we, but Brian will answer the questions. I will do nothing more than just be a pretty face on the other side of the stream. How's it going today, Brian?
It's going good. Yeah. Ready to dive into cumulative layout shift. I will also be saying that once.
CLS, that's it. That's all we're doing today. That's all you get from us. One fumble apiece and we're done. Excellent. So I'm guessing everybody can hear us and see us okay here. So with that, I guess we'll just jump into this. So if you're joining us for the first time in this series, this is part 4. We have one more part to go. There'll be 5 parts in the series, and we're just tackling different metrics that are either core web vitals or things that affect your core web vitals. So in the first 3 webinars, we tackled a lot of these already. You can go back and watch those replays. They're on our YouTube channel. There's also a corresponding blog post on theadminbar.com. Brian was nice enough to share all the presentations he made, and we've turned those into blog posts. So they're really great reference guides. If you watch this video and then 2 weeks later you have a CLS issue, you can always go back to the blog post, which I'll have this new one done early next week. We'll get all those on the website, so you can always go back to those and reference it. It's very bullet point style, so it's really easy to follow along if you need to do that. If you don't know Brian is the co-founder of Perfmatters. He is an expert when it comes to anything performance related, and super lucky to have him here. And if you haven't already, we have a nice coupon code here for Perfmatters. If you haven't checked that out, I don't know how much we'll be diving into the plugin today, but we definitely have on some of these previous episodes of this. So you can go to perfmatters.io and use the code TheAdminBar, and that will save you 20%. Which is pretty awesome. I would also encourage everybody to go to Brian Lee Jackson and sign up for his email list. He sends out a fantastic newsletter, and keeping up with Brian means you're going to keep up with lots of really cool things. So I would encourage everybody to jump on there and get on that email list. Again, like I said, you can use #Q for questions, but I don't think it's going to be too out of control. Just toss your questions in there and I will save them on my end. So Brian, I think I covered anything. Did I leave anything out? Or are we ready to share screens and get this thing underway?
Well, I think, ready to get started.
Let's do it. All right. I'm going to put your screen share on the screen. Looks like we're good there. And I'll hand it to you.
Okay, cool. And I'm not going to full screen this because we'll be bouncing back and forth here a little bit between this and a browser. But
perfect.
So let's dive in. So I'll say it one more time. Cumulative layout shift, CLS, is a core web vitals metric used to measure how much the content of a web page moves or shifts unexpectedly while the page is loading. So this is a official core web vitals metric, and I always like to emphasize this. Not all of the metrics are what you pass or fail on. So only CLS, LCP, and INP are what you're failing or passing on for core web vitals metric. The other things like TTFB, FCP, they impact these, but they're not what you're passing or failing on. So I think a lot of people just look at PageSpeed Insights and they sometimes think they got to pass everything. That's not necessarily the case. And so let me see if this video works here. I have it's a good little representation of CLS. So see how you load in the page, and I'll play it again here too. So say you load the page, you're moving your mouse, you're waiting for the rest of the JavaScript to load behind the scenes. You go to click that button and you wanted to click the back, but you hit the submit order by accident because that top thing popped in while everything else was loading. So that's a good example of probably the worst kind of CLS you can think of, because they're actually putting in an order by accident. So most of the time it won't be like a purchase. It'll be more like a annoying visual shift or something. And that's why Google is kind of like hounding us about it, because it's really bad for the impact on the user experience.
Yeah, I can't tell you. Just about every ad I've ever clicked on a blog article was an accidental click, because I meant to just click and scroll and it ended up being an ad. You know, it's like they can predict where my mouse is going to be, and boom, they'll shove the ad right there, you know.
Yep. So yeah, ads are definitely very, very annoying, especially ones, say you have one in the header that moves down the entire page. So then your nav basically is going from here down to here. So, but basically that's what the what CLS is. So what is good CLS? Google basically wants you to have a CLS score of 0.1 or less. So this isn't technically like seconds, like, you know, TTFB, LCP are all measured in just seconds. They use this formula, and this is kind of technical. You don't need to know this, but I thought it was actually kind of interesting because I didn't know how they calculated this before doing a little more research either. Was the impact fraction by the distance fraction that equals to CLS. So the impact fraction is like the percentage of the viewport's width or height that the shifted content occupies. And then the distance fraction measures how far the content has moved relative to the viewport size. So even that's a little hard to comprehend how they're multiplying that together, but basically that's how they get that CLS score. Just think of like how bad it's moving is a really easy way to put it. And again, like most things, they use the 75th percentile to determine where you stand. So 75% of the visits crawls to your site need to meet this good threshold to kind of get that green score. So, you know, they're not going to penalize you on everything, but they want you to get 75% in that green to really pass. And as of 2023, the CLS makes up 25% of the overall score in page speed insights. Although I would argue that, remember that the overall score technically isn't always as important as passing or failing. So the LCP, CLS, INP, those are definitely more important than like reaching that 100 score. Although if you have, you're probably fine on both. But, and actually I don't have this link up. Let me pull this over here for a second.
While you're doing that, I know, you know, it's always this balancing game. Like we feel like we have to please the Google gods by getting good Core Web Vital scores, but the Core Web Vital scores are there to make a better user experience for whoever's visiting your website, right? So you think about this being 25% of your score. Well, yeah, because it's very annoying when everything on your website shifts around, and Google doesn't want to send traffic to websites that people don't like. So you can think about it as, you know, appeasing the Google gods, but you can also think about it as just giving your visitors the best experience possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's lots of controversy about, you know, some SEOs think we harp too much on speed and the scores, and then there's other sides where I've seen the other side of it too. But like you just said, Google really wants you just to improve the user experience. That's why they're doing this. They're not just penalizing us for no reason just to get a stupid score. It's to get better usability on the site. Now this is kind of cool though. This is a Lighthouse scoring calculator. I have the link in the slide too, but you can say you have a little CLS and you want to see how, if you fix the CLS, what would it actually do to your overall score? You can play around with this tool and actually see what it would do and have the impact. So like, let's say, or actually here, let's put this down. Let's get into, let's say you were in the green on pretty much everything. Now, if you're dipping into the CLS, look how much the CLS here by itself impacts it. If you're going into the red CLS, you're like an 80. Whereas if you had fixed the CLS, you're at 100. So you can see how big that's really impacting the site. So CLS is a lot more important than I think people think sometimes.
And I just put a link to that down in the chat here. If anybody's watching live, you can grab that calculator, which is handy.
Okay, so next, how to measure CLS. And this is probably one of the most important and hard things to do, because a lot of times if you know where the CLS is coming from, you kind of know, like, it's that plugin, I can at least talk to this person, to fix it, something like that. But tracking it is really the hard part sometimes. So these are the tools, and these are kind of in order of the preference that I personally use to debug CLS. So PageSpeed Insights is, of course, great to just see, on this page, where do I stand with my CLS score for that. But it doesn't really help much further. So if we go to, I have an example here. If we go to a site with CLS, we can go down to this shifts here. But again, this stuff, I think most people would agree, is not very helpful. I can kind of tell what's going on here based on what's flagging, but most people will probably just look at this and be like, okay, that's great. What did I do about that? So to take that a little further, I usually don't use PageSpeed Insights other than the total score. The Bugbear and PageSpeed Insights, and we'll dive into these further here later on, so don't worry, I'll show you how these are helpful. But Debugbear and Web Page Test are my two favorite tools to go as far deep as you need to with CLS. And I can pretty much grab everything I need to know from those two tools to fix everything. And then other tools, sometimes, you'll get something stubborn and you need another kind of data point to see, like, oh, okay, it's this. Chrome Dev Tools, you can look at CLS. Then there's a CLS debugger tool. So I'll pull this up here. And a layout shift generator tool and a Chrome extension. So let me pull this. So like, this is a layout shift generator. I'm not going to show every one of these little tools, but there are all these other little random tools, links in the slides, that you can kind of like, they've done a good job at like just giving you a representation of like what's shifting on this page type of thing. So if you need another tool, some other tools just to like help you out, check out some of those. The Chrome extension can be useful sometimes, but again, the extension loads the data while you're loading the page. So sometimes, how Chrome extensions work, it's not always as good as a third-party tool to grab stuff. So, but again, try all those out. You might find something useful for your own workflow in those. And then Google Search Console. If you haven't hooked up Search Console on your site, you need to. You should, because the longer you have that up, the better it will be for pulling data. But this is really important for monitoring your user metrics over time. So say, and across your whole site. So say you have a CLS on a page, or say you're failing CLS. What is the best way to grab all the URLs that are failing CLS? Google Search Console is usually the answer for that, unless you're using some other third-party tool or plugin, because that will actually flag. We'll go in here. Now, I don't actually have a site of mine that's failing on this, so I don't have a good representation. But if you go to Core Web Vitals, it will show, like, say all of them were failing CLS in the red. They will show up as poor URLs, and you can dive into the report and go down here, and you can go down into all the individual URLs that are failing CLS. And what I usually do is, the whole site is failing, then you have a bigger problem, structural issue. And what I do is usually grab like 5-7 URLs that are failing and start debugging from there. Because usually once you fix it on one, it will most likely fix it across the board. So just start with a couple and then go from there.
Yeah, if your header is causing CLS issues, then obviously every page on your website is going to have a problem.
Yeah, and usually I always just start with the homepage too, if that's where the source is failing from. It's always just good to debug with the homepage first. But yeah, Search Console, really good. Always take advantage of this Core Web Vitals tool, because it gives you all the data over time and all of the individual URLs that you can drill down into. So
if Search Console would just fix their notification issues, because the amount of false notifications I get from them makes me just delete 90% of the emails without clicking on anything. It would be one hell of a tool if they could fix that.
Yeah, no, I had closed it, but I think I had 700 and something notifications in the top right when I clicked in there last night to pull that up. And none of them I just cleared all as red.
Yeah. Dismiss all.
Yeah. Okay, so now we go into this. And if you've watched the previous presentations, this will kind of be going over the same thing here again, but I want to stress it for anybody new or that comes across this, because this is where kind of some of the controversy is online when it comes to harping over page speed scores. There's a difference between the lab data and real user data. So I'll explain this a little bit more here. So just use, this is just one of my workup site here, one of my blogs here, is this data here is the lab data. So that's the live data of this URL at this moment. That's what's happening. Yeah. However,
when you tested it, that exact test.
Yeah. The real user data is what's happening over time. And that's what this data is at the top here. So that's pulling in, and there's little tips here that I wish they'd make more, but which they'd make bigger. But you can see here, this is pulled over the last 28 days. So this doesn't just change overnight. So if you make a change on your site to CLS and fix it, it's not necessarily going to pass or fail update right away. You might need to wait a week or two and just see how stuff comes in. Same with the delay. It will kind of reflect how delayed it is in Google Search Console as well. This kind of coincides with both. So just keep that in mind. This is what is called real user metrics data. And then also, I always like to mention this little filter tab here is this URL is showing only on the URL that you're on, and then origin is showing across the entire site. So even on my workup site blog here, like, it doesn't get a lot of traffic. So it doesn't even have enough data to show me real user metrics on the homepage of workup. So it's showing me the origin by default because that's all there is. So that's just across the entire site. So it's getting probably some variations, and I can see I have some TTFB issues here. So like, it's probably getting some variations from other stuff other than the homepage. It's pulling in here, but just keep those in mind.
And on top of like this URL versus the origin, if you don't have enough traffic to your site at all, you won't even see this bar across the top because there's just not enough data. You will only see the lab data.
Correct. Here's an example of that. Yeah. So, and shout out to the Bugbear team. They have some demo sites that I'm using in the presentation. Very good. They have a lot of great stuff out there. But you can see here, yeah, no data. So you're not going to get any real experience data at all. So, I mean, you can work on improving the lab data, which should in turn eventually reflect to the real user data if you get enough traffic over time. So it's still worth it to do that, especially for like user experience, CLS, fixing all this good stuff. But if you don't have anything here, you can't really go off of anything for the real user data. Okay. Okay, so common sources of CLS and debugging tips. I realize there's a lot of text in here, but and also, just while we're chatting here, if anyone likes these slide formats, like, let me know on X or something. Like, this is the first time I've ever done slide presentations. I think with Kyle, we've always done just talking. And so if people find it helpful, I would actually like to know. Sometimes it's tricky though here. Like, I would love to include a screenshot, but I sometimes can't because there's not enough room.
Right. Well, I've found them very helpful. I've saved all of them. So I'll give you that feedback immediately.
Okay, great. So yeah, the best way by far to troubleshoot CLS is on a staging site, obviously. And I will say this for a lot of things, but CLS for sure, you really need to work with on staging site because some of the best ways to start debugging is disabling plugins one by one and switching back to the core WordPress theme. I know that's like the restart your computer type of thing people don't like to hear, but unfortunately with CLS, that can be one of the best ways to like track it down immediately. And again, I'll give a shout out to InstaWP here. I use them all the time. I'm a paying customer. Even though my hosting provider has staging, I much prefer InstaWP. It's just faster. It's easier. I can do things quicker. And so I use that daily now. And their plugin is getting really, really good as far as if you want to make a staging site from your existing site on some random host, like move it to Insta. Like I will say that their plugin is getting really, really good at that. So it's, if you need and I think they have one free. Don't hold me to that, but I think their free plan has at least one migration that you can move any site to Insta for free and use that there. So if you don't have a staging site, like, check that out.
Yeah, we have a whole hour and a half webinar on how all their staging works too. So you can
scour
the channel for that one.
Whoops. Well, yeah, go check out his other video then on that. So, but then, yeah, always test multiple times. CLS, even more than LCP or other stuff, is one of those things that will vary a lot. Like sometimes you might not see any CLS at all, and then you might get a little. So what I like to do with CLS is if I'm seeing consistent CLS, it means that there's a problem. So I'll usually test 3 to 5 times to see if there's any CLS consistently popping up. And then let's see here. Best common sources of CLS. So these I try to compile. This is what I see on working with clients every day, customer support tickets, and my own sites. So first thing would be bad theme code or a setting misconfigured. You can't always blame the theme. Sometimes people can cause their own CLS by using the tool or theme wrong. So, but there are many popular page builders. I'm not going to call it any specific names, but there are those that have a lot of CLS issues compared to other ones. I will give a shout out to Elementor here because I've been harsh on them in years past. They are doing a good job at this, actually, on improving performance.
People are going to start thinking we're fanboying over Elementor over the last couple of webinars.
Every presentation, we're giving a shout out to Elementor now. But in our tickets, I would say 90% of the clients I'm working with are running Elementor. So I see it a lot, and then I see these other ones that are having these issues. So it's Elementor is doing a good job at coming back and fixing some of these problems. And so next, dynamic JS in plugins that load things above the fold. So sliders, review and testimonial plugins. These are common things that, because of how they load in with JS and dynamically, can cause CLS. And we'll go into a little bit more of this here later. But optimization plugins. So yes, unfortunately, optimization plugins are a very common source of CLS, including Perfmatters. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of when you tear down and optimize a whole page, sometimes it can cause CLS. The great thing is there's always a way to fix it with Perfmatters. Usually it's like an exclusion or something like that. So you can always fix it. But just be aware that, plugins like Rocket, Perfmatters, Auto Optimize, all of these plugins can cause CLS in some way sometimes.
So is that like a matter of when you delay JavaScript, for example? So the page loads in, but then you move your mouse and things jump around, or is that not happening in these tests because the spider isn't actually moving its mouse around?
I would say yes and no to both of that, because some of the real user data is actually grabbing stuff afterwards. So, but JS is a very common one. So if you're delaying JS and it's loading after, it's probably going to be hidden, to be honest, for CLS. But again, I don't see that very often because if you have a slider above the fold, think about it. The delay at JS is probably going to break the slider from loading right away. So you will probably have already added an exclusion for that because you want the slider to show right away. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
You've already probably tackled the visual part, and then that is now causing CLS from the slider itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So one of the best ways to troubleshoot this would be for Perfmatters specifically is pull this up. We got too many tabs here. is to use our query strings. So we have, and if anyone doesn't know about these, they're very, very helpful. And most optimization plugins actually have these somewhere. So, check their documentation. But we have our query strings here. So you can test with Perfmatters off by adding this at the end of the URL. And I have an example here. So hopefully you can see that. That doesn't zoom in here, but
you're good.
Perfmatters off in the URL there. And you can test with Perfmatters JS off, test with Perfmatters CSS off. So you can test individual features type of thing, or you can test the whole plugin. And then remember that at the editor level in the page itself, we also have the checkboxes for each feature. So you can go at each page level too if you wanted. But that's some ways that you could test whether CLS is coming from Perfmatters or not quickly without having to, go in, turn the plugin off, all this sorts of stuff. And the reason I like it is because I'll use this. Let me copy this here. Back here. I'll use this in like a PageSpeed Insights test and run it, or debug bear test, and I'll run that through. And that will allow me to easily test without having to turn things off, clear the cache layers, clear the CDN, all the stuff we have to do now just to get the new data to show up. Easy way to do that. So
wish you could do that with every plugin.
I use that all the time. Yeah, actually, I do wish that. That would be extremely helpful. I will say most optimization plugins have this now just because of this reason why it's so hard to debug and test things with speed tools. But yeah, it would be great if more plugins had that. So yeah, that's one way to easily kind of rule out Perfmatters or not. Web fonts loading late. That is very, very common one, and we'll dive into that here too. Image dimensions. We'll get into all this. Google Ads, animations. And again, optimization plugins aren't meant to be a quick fix for a CLS issue. I actually get a lot of people sometimes purchasing Perfmatters because they think it's going to help fix CLS as well as the other things. Perfmatters is not meant to fix CLS, and neither is any other optimization plugin. The code itself is really the issue. Now we can help a little bit, say with this web font stuff, we'll show you, but really CLS is at the core of the issue is the underlying code from a theme or a plugin, or like how you're doing your ads type of thing like that.
You really got to add that fix CLS toggle in there and make our lives way easier,
Yeah. That would be like we'd have to say fix WordPress.
Right.
At that point. But yeah.
That's an expensive toggle.
Yeah, very expensive. And I would be out of a job at that point. Debugging avoid layout shifts. So this is the common warning you probably see in PageSpeed Insights test. This is the one that everyone's probably most familiar with. And if you've tried debugging this, again, like I said earlier, the PageSpeed Insights is not very useful. So here's where we're going to go into debug bear and web page test and kind of show you. These are what I do kind of every day. I'm helping someone with CLS, even though it's not really our responsibility. I at least like to help people track it down, like at least say this is the issue. So let's go to debug bear first. So we can see here. So I just ran this thing. This is just through their site speed test. This is a free tool from them. And you can see they have the cumulative layout shift here. And what we'll go into here is, what I like about them is they have thumbnails for every shift that's happening. So see, we have one here. We can see the thumbnail here. So if you look closely, you can see what's happening here. It's the, I don't know if that's big enough here. We can see the only thing you want to look for the differences, basically left or right. And so here we can see this, please wait. This little bar here is loading in late, essentially, and it's bouncing everything down. So in this demo, actually, debug bear made that load in late on purpose because they wanted to show what would happen.
Sure.
So let's say that's like a JS slider. Just imagine that's a slider with JS. And for some reason, whoever coded the slider it's loading in too late. and it's actually re-rendering the screen. So that would end up bouncing the div below it down and causing a shift. So, but the cool thing is, if we go back to here, basically the bugbear is going through each one of these here, which is not very helpful here, but here you can see much more useful information for the exact same thing that PageSpeed Insights is showing you. And you can drill down into each one of these, and it will actually change and update the thumbnails for the shift that's happening. So here we can actually see what's the big difference here. Now you'll notice the text, but that's also happening in all of them kind of too. So the big difference here is this image. That's what's actually causing this here. It's causing this to bounce over to the right here. You can see that's what the red box is. And so this one is actually image dimensions, and we'll go into this more too. But you can kind of drill down in each of one of these and see the difference here. Yeah, we have another thing loading in late. Here, this is actually a text one, so it might be hard to see there, but you can see this is kind of like a Times New Roman or something,
right?
Default, and then this is going to like a Roboto or Arial or some other type of font from Google, and so that's actually causing a shift because the fonts are shifting. And see, this is not as bad with fonts as a entire div shifting, but it still all adds up. So this is what I really like about Debugbear is that you can drill down to the same info, but kind of easily tell where it's coming from right off the bat. And then another thing I love using is their video recording tool. So here you can, whoops, I already have this here. And you can do all this in, Chrome Dev Tools and stuff, but this is just so much easier in my opinion. So you can play this video and watch these shifts happen here. However, what I like to do is this previous frame thing. So I'll go like this here and just toggle it. So there, that's where that first shift is happening with this right there. So, oh, actually that might be sometimes these always aren't in order. That's actually this one, I think, here with the image. But you can see, if you go through, you can see where all the shifts are happening. That one popped in, and that's that. This box expanded again, so something with JS is loading that in, rendering. So I like to use that and the video thing combined, and you can usually tell, like, okay, it's the slider, it's the text, it's the header div, it's the ad here, and then if I want a second type of like verification, I'll hop over into web page test, which is also completely free. And what I like about theirs is click down here, is they do it on hover. So they do these little, same thing, but you can see it's on hover. So it's really easy to see, okay, it's definitely that please wait delayed JS box type of thing that's causing that. And then the next CLS, you can see it's the image dimensions, which we'll dive into from that image right there, causing the entire box to shift because that's missing image dimensions. And then here, you can see it's easily see that it's font data. In this example, I would actually say web page test is easier to see what's going on than Debugbear. So use both of these tools, just run both, and then use all the data from both. So, and here again with something with text or some of these too, you'll notice that once you dive down, some of these tests get a little iffy at the end. But if you fix these big ones first, some of this bottom stuff will kind of just go away eventually too. So I always start with the top ones first. But yeah, in this instance, web page tests almost doing a better job.
It's so handy having tools like that because, like you said, when you do this in PageSpeed Insights, it's almost gibberish. What's underneath there. So,
yep. And then I think I forget where it is. I've shown it in a previous tool, but they also have a video that they record with web page test somewhere in there. You can also watch, and you can I think you can download it, or you can do a frame by frame somehow with that too as well. So similar thing. So yeah, use the thumbnails in both those tools and the videos. Those are just super useful. PageSpeed Insights is almost useless in my opinion. it's great to see if you have CLS. That's about all I would use it for. Okay, so this is where we do the image, and I can't stress how important this is for CLS. This is one of the most important metrics, or not metrics, but things that need to happen to an image. So, and you might have seen the warning, image elements do not have explicit width and or height. So many page and, themes and page builders add this, and I can say about this for everything, but we wouldn't be here if every single thing was doing these things correctly. So if anyone's seen this warning, it means that they're using something that probably is missing it somewhere. So Google wants you to add the image dimensions, width and height, to every single image. And what that does is it prevents re-rendering and scaling of the divs. So if we go back to basically this one here. Oh, I'm looking at my other screen. That's not on this. Sorry about that. So this one here, they didn't add image dimensions on this image. And so the whole browser doesn't know what to do with the scale of that. And so what's happening is it's coming in after the fact, and it's this div doesn't have, basically is missing image dimensions. It doesn't know what to do. And so it's scaling the other div wrong that's sitting right next to it, if that makes sense.
Right.
Think of it like placeholders type of thing. If this had image dimensions, it would just be here. Even if the image didn't load right away, that column would still be there, and it wouldn't bounce over. So image dimensions, super important. You can also use the CSS property aspect ratio, but I wouldn't try doing that manually. If your theme or page builder is using that, great. But like typically to solve this, you just want to make sure you have width or height on the image.
So can I ask you just a little bit of a nerdy question here, but Perfmatters handles this, as you're showing at the bottom of this in a screenshot, with basically a toggle. The problem I have, if I was to go set these dimensions as I'm building the site, right, it's responsive. I don't know what size it's going to be. What size it's going to be depends on how big your browser is at that moment, right? So is that just happening dynamically on the fly through Perfmatters, or do you set, like, basically by setting the width and height, you are setting an aspect ratio?
Basically, and yeah, and so we do have this toggle, as you mentioned, under lazy loading for image dimensions. We actually grab the dimensions using and I think, did I put that in the slide or not? Or no, maybe I took that out because it's kind of technical, but we actually grab the image dimensions using a PHP function. So we grab the image dimensions on the fly and then add the missing width or height. So that's how we do it. And then basically there's also source set going on with responsive images in WordPress. WordPress adds multiple images that are added there. So there's multiple layers going on there. But if you want to bring it back to the source of the issue, is the width and the height there. And, our plugin is one that can add these on there. And again, we're grabbing it dynamically from PHP because the image itself has the image dimensions on it. And then CSS and source set and other things are working more with the mobile side of things. So type of two things going on there.
So the fact that you're doing that on the fly means it's going to do it every time the page loads, essentially. So if you're on a smaller screen or wider screen, every time that page loads, it's going to have the correct dimensions.
Essentially, yeah. Now, and if you're using like edge cache, full page edge cache, we're not doing it on the fly at that point because the whole page is served at the edge. So it's not like it's happening every single load, but if it's an uncached visitor dynamic, then yes, we're adding that there. So
I'm glad y'all figured all this out because my brain's already about to explode just trying to understand it.
Okay, let's go into here. And actually, let me see if I can pull this up here. I wanted to show one more example of that here.
And I've been collecting the questions we got here inside the chat. So I got 2 starred already. Okay. So I'm not ignoring any of your questions here. I'm just going to save them to the end. But if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in there.
I'm just trying to set up here one thing really quick to see if I can show another example here.
No problem.
But I need a logo to upload that let me grab something really weird here.
I was gonna say my downloads folder is just full of random things, so I'm always scared when I open up that on a live stream. I'm like, I have no idea what's going to be in here.
Yeah, I cleared my desktop and everything beforehand, so I have nothing to upload. Okay, so this is a really horrible, ugly example, but it'll work for now. Okay, so here's just an example of like I added a logo, which is a screenshot here, but and this is just like in Generate Press, but you can see here Generate Press is adding, it's like super small here, is adding a width and height here, and then they have a style for the width. So themes and page builders many times will add this stuff for you, but again, even though they do, I see it all the time missing things, and I don't know why things mess up like that, but that's why plugins like Perfmatters, Rocket has the image dimension feature too. Like other plugins have this, and that's why we have to kind of come in and clean up things behind the scenes sometimes to make sure everything has image dimensions. But you can see here, like this is actually changing that value here of the image and width that they're placing on there in the HTML. So okay, so let's improving CLS, lazy loading and dynamic JS. So I wanted to talk about this because at first glance, you might think lazy loading is a big factor for CLS, and it's actually not. So I think I get a lot of tickets where people think is it my lazy loading causing this? And that's usually not the case. And it's because the reason it isn't is because we grab the image dimensions, like we said earlier, and put placeholders behind the scenes to reserve that space. So in that column example we gave earlier, we would have grabbed the image dimensions, put a placeholder for lazy loading, and kind of reserved that column. So it never would have shifted to begin with. So there's two things going on there. But the lazy loading wouldn't have ever caused CLS, even though the image, let's say you lazy loaded something above the fold on purpose, by accident or on purpose, either way. But even if the image flashes in later, that's not CLS because nothing technically moved.
Okay.
So I think that's, some people confuse that sometimes. Like a flash is not CLS, moving is CLS. So lazy loading will typically cause flashes, but not many times it won't cause shifts. Now it can, but again, it's very, very rare that that's actually the main source of the CLS. And again, always, don't lazy load things above the fold, always stuff like that we've gone over in our previous presentations for LCP and stuff. Dynamic content loading. This is something like you might mistake for lazy loading, but can lead to CLS. So one I see actually really regularly is a testimonial review plugin. People like to add that above the fold because they like those Google stars showing right away when you hit that page. And I won't throw this plugin under the bus, but there's one that's really bad right now, and I hope they fix it because I'm sending them tickets from my clients with tickets saying you need to fix the CLS, basically. That it loads in, the images disappear, then reload, and people think it's the lazy loading, but it's actually the whole plugin re-rendering the height. It's causing the whole height of the document to change, waiting for JavaScript to load. And that's causing basically the whole page to go like this, essentially.
Right. And I'm guessing part of that problem is, you might have a really long testimonial coming in or a really short one, because a lot of times you can randomize the testimonials, right?
Exactly. And sometimes developers don't always think of, performance CLS. They're doing like what needs to happen for that to visually display correctly.
Right.
But they're not always thinking of what happens to CLS on the other end. So many times these plugin developers will fix these things easily. It's just sometimes they don't know about it. They forgot about it. You know, stuff like that happens sometimes. So
yeah, that's one of those cases too, where it's hard to just like to solve that problem by setting a minimum height on that section or something, right? Unless you knew like the minimum height of the biggest testimonial in there, but then you might end up with a bunch of blank space, you know? So that's not a great workaround in that case.
Correct. But there are always ways to fix stuff like that, because there are good testimonial plugins out there that do it correctly. So somehow, you know, I don't know how they fixed it, but like somehow they have fixed it with JS, so it loads in correctly. One is it's not a testimonial plugin, but Smart Slider. If I had to use any slider out there, that's the best one in my opinion, as far as the developers, the speed. I'll just throw a Revolution slider under the bus here while we're doing this. I am not a fan of Revolution slider. It is bulky, slow. And so yeah, if you do need to use a slider, Smart Slider is a way to go. And if you're using something like Elementor, like it is usually better to just use their stock one if you don't need something crazy, because that's usually still lighter weight than adding a whole nother solution, if that makes sense.
Right.
But yeah, Smart Slider is actually one that's doing quite well. And yeah, I put in here, yeah, in many cases, you do need to chat with a developer to fix this issue. It's not something that like we can help you fix. And again, if the slider plugin is above the fold, we can delay JS and make your slider not show up right away. But that's
right.
a horrible user experience. So you're going to end up probably talking to us and maybe, or using our quick exclusion and just excluding the slider so it shows right away. But then the CLS happens. So you really need to fix the root of the problem to begin with. And that might be chatting with the developer.
Yet another reason to ward off sliders forever.
I would agree. I hate sliders. I am a static for life.
That's right.
You should start the hashtag static for life. Preloading, swapping fonts. So again, this is a very common source of CLS. Again, it won't be as big as like image dimensions that literally cause a whole div to shift, but it's very, very common to like always be on like the end of the CLS problems happening. So many themes and plugins now utilize swap. So in the good old days, we just had fonts loading and you had this Foyt issue of flashing text. So now pretty much everyone's hopped on the bandwagon of adding swap, which we now pretty much lots of things do. The problem is that swaps back to system fonts temporarily, and that can sometimes cause CLS issues. So kind of a way to get around this is usually it's sometimes just good practice now to just preload your fonts. That's a great way to fix the CLS. Make sure the fonts load right away. And you can do this in Perfmatters. Bring this up here. I think I already have one up here. So I already did this. We have a doc on our site. If you want to go into like how do you find your own fonts, you know, that are on your site and like GT metrics or something, we have kind of a steps by step on that. But you take your fonts, you put them into Perfmatters, and actually in our next update, we're actually going to be removing this cross origin and just adding it by default. There's a few instances where that can cause issues with the CDN, but we're going to just add a filter in that instance. So like this will actually get a little simpler here going forward. But you just add your font preloads, and this will preload across the site. And basically that bumps them to the top of the waterfall, essentially, so that they load right away. And that will essentially fix the CLS because the fonts won't go from, you know, like that Times New Roman to the Google font at that point. Also, while we're in here, I will give a quick shout out to Generate Press with their they have a new local Google Fonts feature. Very, very great. I wish we could get that in WordPress core. They added it just for full site editing themes, which is so annoying. They just don't care about anybody else using classic themes.
I can't remember if it was our last webinar, but I think we were talking about there's ways to like compress some of those Google fonts even smaller, because you end up with a lot of like different character sets that you might not be using on your site. So I actually went through and downloaded the Google font directly from Google Fonts, and it was, so big, I don't remember, and went and used one of those compressors to get rid of all the different character sets that I didn't need, and it compressed it down by, a huge percentage. Well,
Yep.
I then just uploaded that regular Google font directly from GeneratePress, and they must be doing something similar, because their version, once you uploaded it, was already compressed down as much as I could get it compressed down on my end. So I was going to go to all those extra steps to compress my fonts, but I'm like, well, with this new feature, I don't even have to. I just load it in there and I'm done.
Exactly. And that's why I'm giving them a shout out, because if you're running GeneratePress, just go straight to their new feature, because it's doing everything the right way. Whoever built that, I'll give a shout out to Tom or whoever on his team coded that. But I think they listened to all the little nitpicky tickets and things over the years of all the best way to do things. And so, yeah, they built it the right way. And yeah, if you're not using GeneratePress and you're interested in the tool, I think we have a link in one of the previous presentations, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was in the last one. I can go back and find that. I'll add it to these notes as well.
Okay, yeah, I think it's in the FCP one. But yeah, you can still achieve the same thing with any tool out there. And then we have our host fonts locally in our plugin as well. So if you're using some random thing and you want to just host your fonts locally, we have that in Perfmatters as well. Optimizing your fonts can also help technically improve the CLS, because they load faster. Now, that's not a great way to fix the core issue. Preloading is usually a better way, but again, optimizing your fonts will help them just essentially load faster. So, like, and Kyle just kind of went over all the other little things here that I mentioned. So I think we're good there. One other thing I will say here is, if you don't want to mess with CLS on your fonts, like you want to just fix the issue, never worry about it again, and you're not a super design person, you can go to system fonts. Many themes and page builders have just system fonts out of the box. So like we're using system fonts here on our Perfmatters site. So you can't really pick and choose what they look like. Like on a Mac, like this is what the fonts look like. So I like them, and I'm obsessed with performance, so I use system fonts. But I know Kyle, who is a more designer-friendly person, will say that you should use fonts. So it really depends on what you're going for. If you want the speediest, fastest, and you don't care as much about fonts, just use system fonts. But again, I'm not a designer. I don't care as much about the design as I know a lot of people do. So,
well, your site looks a lot better when you're using a Mac than when you're using a Windows machine.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because yes, I do. I saw it on Windows, last year, and yeah, the system font is not as great.
No.
Okay, so next, ads. This is a very common one. And I'm glad I inspired Jonathan to use system fonts. So you got one person at least. One person. For Google Ads, the problem you have there is, Google Ads are super heavy in JS, super slow. And the problem is that the way Google does it out of the box, I don't know why. They're the ones that forced us to fix CLS. And yet when you click like get responsive ad code, if you're using Google AdSense, their thing out of the box causes CLS. If you just go grab their code and use the responsive version, it will scale automatically for the heights and mobile, but it will cause CLS out of the box. So their teams, it's so frustrating that their teams just don't talk together. It's kind of like analytics not caring how big their script is. It's like 150 kilobytes, I think, almost now. It's just ridiculous.
That's par for the course with any Google thing. Like, it's the cause of all the problems that they want you to fix.
It is, yeah. So the way to fix that is to reserve the space using placeholders. So think of it just like we do with image dimensions. You kind of want to take that box and make sure that box never changes, even though if the ad isn't there yet. So I always recommend, if you're using a tool like Elementor, I think Cadence has they don't call it elements. In Cadence, so GeneratePress has elements. Cadence has hooks. I don't know what it is. I don't know, but all these kind of things have ways that you can, you know, add these little hooks and functions in now. So like if you're good with CSS, you can just use it like an element in generate press and say, I want my add code and I want a hard coded div with size around it in an element. And you can like deliver your add code that way. Now, if you're not like a coder or don't know CSS as much, I like to just like, you can use a plugin like advanced ads. And I think I have one up here. Let me see here. And the links to these actually go to their docs on how they fix CLS specifically, because they each have thought through these, obviously, because all they do is add. So add inserter, this one's add inserter, but yeah, either one of them, but do the both. They have basically a box in here. So, and they let you basically, you know, put a width and height on there if you want it. And they have ways to determine whether it's mobile or desktop. So basically you go through, pick your boxes, pick your devices type of thing, but you're more like hard coding those sections type of thing rather than just like doing one code from Google and letting it go all over the place type of thing.
Right.
The one example here, did I have this up here? Oh, let me pull this up. Specifically didn't have this tab open because the site is so horrible. I didn't want it loading the whole time in the background. Is our lovely The Guardian. This is a great example of, if we reload this page here, we can see all these CLS shifts happening. And it's just horrible. I mean, it's just, I can't think of a worst way to load a website, to be honest. And again, I'm on a fast speed connection. So like, I'm sure if anyone, I mean, I would never recommend reading The Guardian, to be honest, but if you reload this site on a mobile device, I mean, it's going to just be way, 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 way worse. And yeah, you can see here the layout shifts in Debug Bear I'm using in that example. Oh, here, actually I have one up here too. Here's The Guardian. So you can see all these shifts happening. But again, if you are The Guardian, you probably don't need to worry about things like scores and page speed insights. I always like to use the Taylor Swift example. Like people will go buy the Taylor Swift album from her website or a shirt, regardless of how fast or slow it loads. So,
if we could all be Taylor Swift.
Yeah. Okay, and this is getting towards the end here, is the avoid non-composited animation. So this one is very, very technical, and to be honest, this even goes above my head a little bit into my brother, who's more the hardcore developer type of a person that would be doing something with this. But basically, they're just saying that you're using animations in a way that aren't optimized for performance or that are as smooth as they could be. The only way to fix this is really to chat with the developer of whoever's adding it. So usually in PageSpeed Insights, you can like at least narrow down to the div. You can probably tell who's adding it. You know, like is it Divi or Elementor? You know, whose name is on that div type of thing, and then kind of go from there to see like what CSS it is on that div type of thing. But the more technical explanation, and I actually found this a little bit interesting, but basically here's the order in which things are rendered in a browser. So you have your JavaScript, the styles, if they're coming from JavaScript, layout, paint, and then the composite basically of the page. So each step uses the result of the previous operation. So if your code does something that triggers layout, the paint and composite steps need to run again. So a non-composite animation is any animation that triggers one of the earlier steps rendering in the pipeline. So like style. So basically it's causing all this work having to do again. And so the reason why it's bad is because it's performing worse because the browser has to do more work. So basically it's having to do more steps all over again.
Right. I know I can't ever remember which ones it is, but I watch a lot of Kevin Powell CSS videos, and when he's talking about CSS animations, like I want to say one of them was like box shadows. When you're animating box shadows, it actually causes the page to have to repaint constantly if that shadow's being reanimated, and that can cause performance issues as well. So I know I need to get a good list of those together, of some of those transitions that you should kind of avoid in there.
That would be, the box is a great example of exactly what could get flagged in page speed insights probably for something like this. And again, I typically see this on older stuff too. So like not a brand new like stock Elementor site. I typically see it on older themes or someone that hasn't maybe updated stuff. Because a lot of times developers will, like use the latest and greatest technique, hopefully, for their animations. So yeah, I think that's about it. So we'll go over the quick summary. So just go through these. Score of 0.1 or less. Remember, it's an official metric that this is something that you do pass or fail on. Debug Bear and Web Page Test is the two tools I always recommend using to help track it down. Use Google Search Console if you're having trouble across your whole site, or that real user data on the origin tab is flagging for CLS. Like, then go to Search Console, grab a few of the URLs that are flagging there, and then go to the tools and start debugging from there. Many CLS related things are not meant to be fixed by an optimization plugin. Again, like you can preload the fonts, image dimensions, like those help fix, but like sliders, things about the fold, ads, like these all need to be fixed with how you're adding them or with the developer of whoever's coding that. And then, with height images, lazy loading, unlike what some people might think, is not a big source of CLS. It can be a little. Don't lazy load things above the fold, of course, but not a huge source. So it's usually one of these other issues. Preload your fonts, placeholders for Google Ads, avoid non-composited animations. So just be careful with the CSS that you're running on stuff. And then we have the kind of in every presentation, but just remember, everything doesn't have to be perfect. You don't necessarily need to get the CLS to 0. I would aim for that because that is achievable usually, unlike some of the other sometimes metrics. But you might have variations here and there too. So especially on some crazy large complex sites, just a little tad of CLS is it's not the end of the world or anything. And then, don't be afraid to reach out to the developer for help. Usually they are the ones that need to fix these issues. So if I see a problem from a developer that's asking us for help, I send them straight to the developer and tell them what they need to say to get them to see it. So developers need to fix these issues. And then just remember the 28-day delay with the real user data. Again, it's not an instant type of thing.
Excellent. So question, if we're dealing with we'll just use ads as an example. If you have an ad across the top of your site or whatever, the Guardian example where it was like above the header, if you absolutely position something so it was on top of all the content, that would avoid some of these CLS issues, right? I mean, you're going to cause some design issues because you're going to have overlapping elements, but even if that loaded in later because of that delay to get the script loaded and everything, that would probably solve the CLS, right?
Oh yeah, and basically that's what this ad inserter here is doing. It's basically hard coding that box. So like, even say you would go to the Guardian, you might see that white space there, but that box there with the CSS and HTML is still there and always there.
Gotcha.
Now for some reason Guardian doesn't like that, and if you have an ad that big, it might not look good either. So I could see like maybe why they didn't do it. But again, it's not a great user experience because on a slow connection, you might actually want to click the nav and then it bumps you down because it's actually so much slower. So I would never want the CLS happening like that.
They don't mind if you click the ad though. So
actually, that's true too. I didn't think about
All right. I wanted to ask you to clarify something for me on here, because I was thinking, I wrote a note early on in this presentation. When we did a lot of these other webinars, you talked about running the page speed insights test 2 or 3 times to get kind of the average of the score, because your server, might have a quicker or slower response time each time you load it, right? So I was thinking on CLS that might not be as necessary, because if something's going to shift, it's going to shift every time, right? But you mentioned in there that you still probably want to run those tests a couple times. So is that like a caching thing, that sometimes it shifts, and if it hits the cache, it doesn't? Or
yeah, you would think, if everything was perfect, you would think that, like, yes, the shift should happen every single time. In a lot of cases it does, but many times, like with ads, depending on how fast something loads in, the CLS can change. And if you have a Google AdSense site is a great example, because there's so much JS loading that the shifts can actually happen at different times. And so it can vary a lot.
I guess that way, if you're loading something in from a third party, from a different server, you're also then having to deal with their server response time, right? That you have zero control
exactly
over.
So you have all these other variations, which are then also could be impacting CLS, if that makes sense.
Right.
So the more complex the site, or the more more third-party resources, obviously that's going to vary. But I mean, we work with a lot of clients that are like running ads, so like that's maybe why we see we test multiple times a lot too. But if you're just running a stock, fairly static Elementor site, and say you have one bad slider and a little CLS from fonts, that will probably be pretty consistent, as far as like you'll see the slider every single time. The font one, though, is sometimes a little varying. So it'll like sometimes do a little bit of CLS, maybe sometimes not, sometimes a little bit. So that's why I always just recommend running at least 3 to 5 times, even with the CLS stuff. The good news is, even if you get CLS once, it means it's probably happening, if that makes sense.
Right.
So because it triggered from something.
Yeah, there's probably not many false positives in that case.
Yeah, not as many false positives as other metrics. Yeah, with CLS. So like,
Gotcha.
if it happened once, it's probably happening. So
okay.
Yeah.
Charlie asked in here, does CLS not apply to below the fold?
In most cases, yes, I would say that's correct. However, depending on how things loading, Google does scan the entire page. So I have seen things flagged from below the fold before. Okay. So that one can be a little hit or miss, to be honest, because a good example is, if you go into Google Search Console, they have this like live preview tool. I don't know if you've seen that, where you can see an image thumbnail of how your thing looks on. Basically, it's used for the robots TXT tester to see what's crawlable. And if you look at that thumbnail, Google's actually crawling the entire mobile site. And so they're using some of that data to push back into. So like a CLS happening below the fold, or like right below it, could still flag in there. Most of the time, I will say he is correct. Yeah.
I guess with that, the way earlier on your slide, you were talking about how it was calculated, right? If you have something at the top of your page that pushes the next thing down, it's pushing everything on the page down, right? So more stuff is moving. But if it was at the very bottom of the page, only, from there down is moving, and it's less of that percentage maybe.
Correct. That's actually a better way to word it. Is the reason why it could still cause it is because of something else still cascading down the page type of thing. Like you said, if it's just a footer, like moving back and forth left to right, that's probably not going to show up anywhere. Because Google is focused on above the fold. However, on many sites, we just see the cascade go all the way down. Right. So that's why I say, don't think that just because you're hiding things, that is not going to show up, down there. And I don't like to use the word hiding, but that technically that's what some people are. That's what
sure. All right. Does embedding a YouTube video in a hero background impact the CLS issue?
Embedding a YouTube in a hero background? No. I mean, so if you're using like Elementor, I think that's probably what they're talking about, like Elementor or Cadence let you throw that YouTube embed in there, and then it's like using the video in the top there. That shouldn't cause it, because like Elementor has width and height already on the container for that static div, essentially.
Right.
So the video itself is not an issue. It's the div that the video is in, if that makes sense.
I would think it would almost be worse if it was not a background video, if it was just like a video embed that maybe didn't have those width and height set, right? Because the video embed is going to take longer to load.
And that's kind of what I was thinking of at first, because iframes, which technically is what a YouTube embed is, iframes can have CLS issues. However, many times when you go grab the iframe code to embed it, there's a width and height already on it by default. Yeah. And so you typically, I don't see CLS coming from iframes, just because many embedders have it when you grab it. So, but yeah, in the hero background video, we'll have it on the div that it's in already typically.
Excellent. Well, I think those were all of our questions today. I asked again if anybody had any more, but that's all I got on these. So we either nailed it or confused everybody. I did want to, before we wrap up and get out of here, I did want to talk about our last installment in this series, which is going to be covering 2 metrics. So far, we've only done 1 metric at a time. So just to recap for people, we did TTFB, we did FCP, LCP, and today we've done CLS. And our next one we have scheduled for October 11th. So that one's actually going to be a little bit of, we'll give Brian a little bit of break here to prepare for this last one. That one's going to be covering INP and TBT. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what we have in store for that?
So yeah, so interaction to next paint, that's what INP is. And then TBT is total blocking time. So these are quite technical, but basically interaction to next paint is it is one of the core Web Vitals metrics, official. So that's why I wanted to cover it. And it's one of the newer ones that came out, was it early last year? Sometime last year. And basically it measures how long things paint after you interact with the page, and it measures the longest and worst offenders. So say you have a mobile menu, you click it, and then that expands. It's measuring kind of the process for that to paint, for the next step to happen. So and again, it scans all of these different things going on. So clicks, pop-ups, all of these interactions to next paints that are going on, and it's basically measuring the worst of the worst. And that's what you're getting, I guess, not penalized on, but that's what it's looking at.
I'll be interested to see how that's tested in the lab data, since the lab data is not clicking around. I could see the live data, but the lab data might be harder, huh?
Exactly. And that's where we're going to go into probably some RUM data, which is real user metric data, monitoring over site. So it'll be a little different than some of the other ones where we just use PageSpeed Insights or live data. But yeah, I have some thoughts on how to kind of show this already. So
excellent.
We'll go into that. And then total blocking time, it's just basically, many times it's just JS blocking the main thread of the page. And the reason I combine this is total blocking time and INP kind of go hand in hand. If you have high TBT, you probably also have high INP. So I felt like it'd be good to put these together because they're very intertwined. And so we're kind of going to look at if you fix this, you'll probably also, fix this type of thing. So we'll look at both of those. And again, yeah, it'll be a very different, I don't even know fully what I'm doing yet with it.
Excellent.
But we might be using some tools one example would be a RUM tool, like Real User Metrics tool. Basically, this tool runs on your site, every URL, just constantly watching everything, and it will measure the interactions to next paint over time and the worst offenders. So once you have all that data over time, then you can start looking at debugging where the INP is coming from. And that's what we'll show in the real user data for PageSpeed Insights. The problem is it is trickier to debug this live with lab data. So what we'll do, there are some tricks though that I've learned, at least since that came out. So we'll go into all the little tricks that I have, how I tackle it, what I've seen in client tickets, and of course, other stuff. So.
Excellent. Love it. All right. Well, we will wrap it up and get out of here. Just a reminder for folks, you can save 20% on Perfmatters if you go to perfmatters.io and use the code THEADMINBAR. That coupon code's been good for a long time, and I don't think Brian's taken away from us too soon. So we're not trying to FOMO you on that. You should be able to pick that up anytime you want. If you made it this far, you must like this stream a little bit. So if you'd give it a like, I'd really appreciate that. That'll help push us out to more people. And like I said, just like we did with the other ones, Brian will share these slides with me, and I'll put it all together in a post on the admin bar, so you can go back and grab all these links and all this information. We'll include the screenshots, all that kind of stuff, so you'll have everything you need on there. Look for that in the next actually, I said next week, but Brian's about to go on vacation, so we'll give it a couple weeks. We'll get it up there. I don't want to hurry him on all that.
I'll get it to you.
Okay, excellent. Well, I realize we always do this webinar on Friday. I'm like, their support's great. And you're like, please don't send us a bunch of support requests on Friday afternoon. So I was trying to not harm you this time.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully they won't get too many from people reaching out just to fix CLS for Perfmatters.
True.
But yeah, we do help a lot of people with CLS, to be honest, because they're trying to fix everything else, and then they also have CLS. So it's type of, they're trying to fix everything type of a thing. So, but yeah, we have that discount code, and I am going on vacation, which I'm looking forward to.
Excellent. Well, enjoy it. You've earned it. You've earned it today. I would go ahead and just take off now. You're a couple hours behind me, but it's probably time to put it up today. So you've earned it. Excellent, Brian. Well, I appreciate it as always. This is awesome. We have amassed quite the library of ways to improve the performance on your site. So all these videos are on a playlist on our channel. So if you want to go back and watch some of those other ones, you can go through all of these. So again, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate all this education you've done for our community. Have an awesome vacation, and we'll do this again in October.
Thanks.
All right. We'll talk to y'all soon. Everyone.